Hey ESS folks, it's Miss Lenorovitz, and this video is going to be a recap of what you have already accomplished on your carbon cycle. If you were out last class or if you missed a detail, this is a good one to go back and review. So the goal of what you're doing here is you're representing the carbon cycle, or how carbon travels from one reservoir or place where it's stored on Earth to another. Our focus in this video is going to be the reservoirs and the forms that carbon takes. So all of this is going to be about the atom carbon, 6 protons, in most cases 6 neutrons, and 6 electrons. And because it has 4 outer electrons called valence electrons, carbon likes to make 4 bonds. So that means it's really good at connecting to other things. So you've been working on constructing a model in which we're going to represent how that works. Our model is pretty simple. We're going to represent a slice through Earth representing part of the terrestrial ecosystem, so land, as well as part of the hydrosphere. So we're going to represent the oceans here to do that. Along the sides of your diagram, if you haven't already, you're going to want to label the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, which we're going to represent with the ocean, the geosphere, so the materials below Earth's surface, and then the biosphere. On your model, you're going to need to add in a volcano and a tree. Once you've done that, your next step is going to be to add in the carbon reservoirs. Again, those are places where carbon is found on Earth. You will see that you have 6 differently sized circles. They are scaled to represent each of the 6 different major reservoirs where carbon is found on Earth. The largest circle here is meant to represent the largest reservoir, so Earth's crust, with 5,700,000 gigatons of carbon. A gigaton is a billion tons of carbon. The smallest circle here is meant to represent the smallest reservoir, which is in plants at 560 gigatons. So you want to make sure you've labeled each circle with the appropriate name of the reservoir and amount in gigatons. Once you've done that, you're going to place them onto your diagram. So you want them to approximately be in this position. So the atmosphere one is labeling all of the gases that are held in by gravity on Earth's atmosphere. My recommendation in terms of other things you're going to add to your model later is to place that atmosphere reservoir somewhere between the 2 clouds. The ocean reservoir is going to go in your ocean. Fossil fuels underneath the surface on the land that we're showing here, soils near the top of that landform that we're showing, plants growing on top of the surface, those are going to be terrestrial plants, and then the crust. So once you've added those pieces, you are then ready to add a little bit more information. We're going to add information in terms of the forms that carbon is found in, and there are 2 big forms that we're going to focus on. For those of you who have taken biology, you know there are some other molecules that are important in living organisms. One of those forms is going to be hydrocarbons. So a hydrocarbon is any chain of carbon atoms that has hydrogen attached to it as well. And as you've learned already, the bonds, or the connecting pieces, which are representing shared electrons between atoms, are storing chemical potential energy. And when those bonds are broken, that energy can then get released. So you're going to be focusing on hydrocarbons in this model and carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are related. They also have oxygen in them. So carbohydrates means carbon bound to water. Carbohydrates are the types of carbon molecules we typically find in living organisms. They exist there along with proteins and lipids and nucleic acids. So your next step is that you're going to need to label each one of the pieces that will ultimately go onto your model to represent the forms in which we find carbon. So the representation here, each one, so you have cells in humans, cells in organisms, cells in phytoplankton, which are a type of small floating organism in the ocean that can photosynthesize, calcium carbonate, which is the material that makes up shells, carbon dioxide, which you know is a gas in the atmosphere, methane, which is also a gas in the atmosphere that functions as a greenhouse gas, coal, which is a solid material, hydrocarbons, which are found in fossil fuels, carbonic acid, which is the form that carbon takes when carbon dioxide dissolves into water and reacts with it, limestone in rocks, in this case it's calcium carbonate, so it's the same material that makes up shells. It's just old shells that have been compressed geologically over lots of time. You have several other pieces. Anytime you see a plant there, we're representing the starches and sugars in plants. So whether that's trees or grasses. You have a representation of soil here. So soil contains carbon in the microbes, so the bacteria and the fungi and the invertebrates that live in there, as well as any decomposing organic matter. There's carbon in hydrocarbons in gasoline, carbon in the cells in bones, carbon that's present again as sugars and starches in plants. So here we have something more recognizable as food that we might eat. You're going to need a few more carbon dioxide molecules, cells in marine life, starches in sugars in plants, in particular plants that represent wetland plants or swamps, and carbon that will come out of volcanoes as carbon dioxide, and carbon that will come out of factories or through anything else that combusts fossil fuels. Once you have all of those parts labeled and cut out, you're then going to assemble them and attach them to your carbon cycle. So now what you have represented on your carbon cycle diagram are each of the major reservoirs, examples of different types of carbon in each of those reservoirs, and examples of the form that that carbon takes. This is probably a good place in the video to pause to make sure that you've updated your model to include all of these pieces. You'll find out more about how to address processes and fluxes in the next series of videos.